AITA for moving out because I don't want to help my boyfriend out with the rent. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. My boyfriend and I have been together for 3 years, and for the most part, I believed our relationship was solid. We met when I was finishing up my undergrad, and he had already been working in finance for a couple of years. He was successful, charming, and incredibly supportive, or so I thought. Right now, I am in the middle of getting my master's degree in social work, which means my life is a constant cycle of unpaid internships, classes, and studying. I knew going into this career that I would never make 6 figures, but I love what I do, and I have always been prepared to make sacrifices. What I did not expect was that my boyfriend, the person I thought was my biggest supporter, would suddenly turn on me. For context, I have no income right now. My master's program requires a year-long unpaid internship, which I do 3 days a week, and my classes take up the other 2. Between commuting, studying, and being in class or at my internship, my weekdays are absolutely packed. I wake up at the crack of dawn, commute for over an hour to my placement, work all day, come home exhausted, and then have to study or work on assignments. The weekends are the only time I have to breathe, and even then, I'm usually catching up on readings or trying to spend whatever little time I have with my boyfriend. Financially, I rely on student loans for most of my expenses. My mother helps me out by covering my MetroCard and any healthcare expenses, which is a huge relief, but everything else, food, personal expenses, even contributing when my friends want to go out, I have to be incredibly careful with. It is not easy, but I make it work. Before I moved in with my boyfriend, I was living in a small, pretty run-down apartment that had a huge roach infestation. I tried everything to get rid of them, but no matter how many traps or sprays I used, they kept coming back. It got to the point where I was so disgusted and stressed that I started spending more nights at my boyfriend's place. He lived in a beautiful, luxury condo in the city, the kind of place I could never dream of affording. It was a completely different world from my apartment, and honestly, it was such a relief to stay somewhere clean and comfortable. As my lease was coming to an end, he asked if I wanted to move in with him. I was hesitant at first because I knew I would not be able to afford half of his rent. I joked that his living standards would take a hit if I moved in because I could never afford a place like his, but he reassured me that he would cover everything. He made it clear that he wanted me to live with him and that he was more than happy to pay the rent while I was still in school. The plan was that after I graduated and started working, we would split rent based on our incomes. That seemed reasonable to me, especially since I would be making significantly less than him even at my highest earning potential. I suggested moving into a more affordable place in Queens or Brooklyn because I did not want him to feel like he was carrying such a big financial burden alone, but he was adamant about staying in his current place. He loved it there, and since he was paying, he wanted to keep it. I had no complaints, it was a beautiful apartment, and I was happy to be with him. So in August, I moved in. Everything was fine for a while. We settled into our routine, and despite my busy schedule, I tried to make sure I was still contributing to the relationship in non-financial ways. I did most of the cooking, I made sure the apartment was clean, I supported him emotionally whenever he had a stressful day at work. I thought we were in a good place. Then, out of nowhere, he started bringing up rent. At first, he made offhand comments like, "Must be nice not having to worry about bills," or, "I work so hard to pay for this place." It made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just venting about work stress. But then he got more direct. One night, after coming home from a dinner with his friends, he sat me down and told me he thought it was unfair that I wasn't paying rent. He said his friends thought it was weird that I was living there for free and that he was essentially supporting me. I was completely blindsided. I reminded him that he was the one who had insisted on paying the rent. I literally could not afford to pay $2,500 a month, and he knew that. He started saying things like, "Well, I didn't think it would feel like this," and, "I don't want to feel like I'm being taken advantage of." That word, taken advantage of, stung. I was exhausted, barely keeping my head above water with my workload, and now he was making me feel like a burden in my own home. I asked him what changed, and he kept bringing up his friends. Apparently, they all thought I was a gold digger because I wasn't paying for half of everything. It was honestly infuriating because these were the same guys who went after women who didn't work at all and just spent their boyfriend's money on shopping sprees and fancy vacations. Meanwhile, I was in grad school, working for free, trying to build a career that would literally help people. And somehow, I was the gold digger. I told him straight up that I couldn't afford to pay rent, and if he had changed his mind about our agreement, then he should have been honest with me instead of letting his friends dictate how he felt. He got defensive and said he just wanted me to help out. I asked him if he expected me to take on a paid job on top of my already insane schedule, and he shrugged. That was the moment I realized this wasn't the same person I had been with for the past 3 years. I told him that if he saw me as a leech, then he should find someone within his social class so he wouldn't have to worry about supporting a gold digger like me. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me like he didn't know what to say. That night, I packed a bag and left to stay at a friend's place. I wasn't going to beg to stay somewhere I wasn't wanted, and I definitely wasn't going to scramble to come up with money I didn't have just to make him feel better in front of his friends. Now, I'm figuring out my next steps. I don't have a stable income, but I'll probably crash with friends until I find something affordable. It sucks because I really did love him, but I can't be with someone who lets other people dictate how he values me. I keep thinking about how easily he turned on me. One minute, he was adamant about taking care of things, and the next, I was a freeloader. It makes me wonder if he ever actually respected me or if he was just happy to be in control until someone else told him he shouldn't be. So, am I the asshole for moving out? Update 1. After leaving my boyfriend's condo, I spent the first night at my friend's place lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had changed. One day, I was in what I thought was a supportive, understanding relationship, and the next, I was being called a leech and a gold digger because of a conversation he had with his friends. I had replayed the conversation in my head over and over again, trying to figure out if I had missed something, if I had done something wrong, but no matter how I looked at it, the facts remained the same. He had made an agreement with me, he had encouraged me to move in, and now, because of external pressure, he had decided to change the terms and make me feel like a burden in the process. I wasn't going to stay somewhere I wasn't wanted. I called my mom the next morning. I had been avoiding it because I knew she would worry, but I needed to let her know what was going on. As expected, she was upset, not just about the situation but about the way my boyfriend had treated me. She had never been his biggest fan, not because he was wealthy but because she always worried that we came from such different worlds. She had always taught me to be independent, to stand on my own 2 feet, and she reminded me of that as soon as I told her what had happened. She said she would help me out as much as she could, but with her own financial responsibilities, the most she could afford to contribute toward my rent was $800 a month. It wasn't a lot, not in New York City, but it was something. I thanked her and immediately started looking for places in Queens, focusing on areas that were close to public transportation so my commute wouldn't be unbearable. I had always preferred the idea of living somewhere more affordable, somewhere where I wouldn't feel constantly out of place among luxury apartments and people who casually dropped thousands of dollars on designer bags and weekend trips. My boyfriend had always brushed off my concerns about feeling uncomfortable in his world, telling me that it didn't matter, that we were a team, that my financial situation wasn't an issue. But clearly, it had become one. After a few hours of searching, I found a few places that fit within my budget. They weren't glamorous by any means, but they were clean, safe, and less than 15 minutes from the city. One of them was a 3-bedroom apartment where 2 other women around my age were already living. It was a bus ride away from my school, and from the photos, it looked cozy and well-maintained. I reached out to the landlord, scheduled a viewing, and went to check it out a couple of days later. Walking into that apartment felt like a breath of fresh air. It was nothing like my boyfriend's luxury condo. There was no doorman, no rooftop terrace, no floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. But it felt warm. The girls living there were friendly, and we instantly clicked. They were both students as well, juggling school and work just like me, and they understood what it was like to be on a budget, to stretch every dollar. I didn't feel out of place there. I didn't feel like I had to justify my financial situation or prove my worth. I texted the landlord that night and signed the lease the next day. Once everything was finalized, I told my boyfriend about my new place. I thought he would be relieved, that he would be happy I found something that worked for me. Instead, he got upset. He asked me to stay, saying that if $800 a month was all I could afford, then that's what I could pay. He told me he didn't want me to leave, that he didn't care what his friends thought, that he had just been feeling overwhelmed by the financial responsibility and the pressure from others. I listened to him, but deep down, I knew that I couldn't stay. I couldn't trust that he wouldn't change his mind again in a few months, that he wouldn't come back with another demand for more money. He had already done it once. What would stop him from doing it again? The fact was, he could afford to live in that condo without my help. He had lived there alone for years, paid for everything without issue. If it had really been a financial strain, that would have been one thing, but this wasn't about money. This was about control, about perception, about what other people thought. I told him that I wasn't comfortable staying somewhere when the terms of our agreement could change at any moment. I reminded him that I had originally wanted to live somewhere more affordable, somewhere where I could pay my own way, but he had been the one to insist that I move in with him, that he would cover the rent. I told him I wasn't mad about the money, I was mad that he let his friends' opinions override the conversations we had as a couple. He didn't have much to say after that. Now, word is getting around to our mutual friends, and some of them seem to think I'm being unreasonable. They say I should have just stayed and paid the $800 since he was now willing to compromise. They say I shouldn't have let him pay my portion of the rent in the first place, that I should have insisted on contributing something from the start. It's frustrating because these are people who never had a problem with the arrangement before, but now that my boyfriend has changed his mind, they suddenly have all these opinions. I don't regret my decision. I know that if I had stayed, it would have only been a matter of time before another conversation about money came up. I didn't want to be in a relationship where I constantly felt like I had to prove my worth, where my financial situation was used as a weapon against me whenever it was convenient. I am not ashamed of being a student. I am not ashamed of the fact that I chose a career in social work, even if it means I will never make as much money as he does. What I am ashamed of is that I trusted someone who, in the end, didn't really see me as an equal. Now, I'm moving into my new place in Queens, and honestly, I feel relieved. It might not be a luxury condo, but it's mine. I won't have to walk on eggshells, wondering when my financial situation will become an issue again. I won't have to feel like a guest in my own home. I won't have to deal with someone who lets his friends dictate how he values me. I don't know what will happen with my relationship from here. Maybe he'll realize what he lost, or maybe this is the beginning of the end. But for now, I know I made the right decision. Update 2. A few days after I signed the lease for my new place, I thought things had finally settled. I was emotionally drained but relieved, ready to start fresh in an environment where I wouldn't have to constantly justify my existence. But just as I was beginning to breathe again, Jason called me. His name flashing across my screen made my stomach twist. I hesitated before answering, expecting more guilt-tripping, but his tone was surprisingly calm. It almost sounded calculated, like he had rehearsed what he was going to say. He started by saying that he had been thinking a lot about everything and that it didn't make sense for us to live separately if I could afford to pay rent somewhere else. He told me I was wasting money when I could just give that $800 to him instead and stay in the condo, where I was already comfortable. He said that since we were in a relationship, we should work things out instead of making drastic decisions that didn't benefit either of us. He made it sound logical, almost convincing, but I knew better. This wasn't about logistics or what made sense financially, this was about control. I told him that I had already committed to my new place and wasn't going to back out. The moment I said that, his tone shifted. The calmness in his voice faded, replaced by something harder, something that made me realize that this conversation was never about fixing things. It was about reeling me back in before he lost the upper hand completely. His voice grew sharper as he asked how I planned to maintain my responsibilities in our relationship if I wasn't living with him. He asked who was going to cook, who was going to clean, who was going to take care of him if I was off living somewhere else. I sat there, stunned. Responsibilities? Take care of him? It was like he was peeling back a layer of himself that I had never fully seen before, or maybe I had seen glimpses of it but ignored them. I reminded him that I had done those things because I wanted to, not because it was my job. I wasn't his housekeeper, and I definitely wasn't going to stay in a situation where I was expected to play that role just because we were dating. That was when his frustration boiled over. He snapped, accusing me of throwing away a great relationship over something stupid. He told me I was going to regret this, that I was acting irrationally, that I wasn't thinking about the long term. But I was. For the first time in a while, I was thinking clearly about my own future, not just about what would keep him happy. I told him that what was actually stupid was expecting me to stay in a situation where I wasn't respected. Before he could argue further, I hung up. I thought that was the end of it. I figured he had finally accepted that I wasn't coming back, that I had made my decision and wasn't going to be manipulated into changing it. But I underestimated just how desperate he was to keep his ego intact. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from mutual friends. Some of them were genuinely confused, asking what had happened because Jason had apparently told them some watered-down version of the story that conveniently left out the part where he tried to guilt-trip me into paying rent after promising I wouldn't have to. Others were outright trying to push me into reconsidering. One text read, "Jason really misses you. He was just overwhelmed, give him another chance." Another person said, "He's a great guy, he just didn't know how to express himself." The worst was when one of them outright admitted, "Yeah, he asked us all to reach out to you because he thinks you'll listen to us." And that was when it all clicked. This wasn't about love, and it wasn't about working things out. Jason wasn't upset because he missed me or because he realized he had made a mistake. He was upset because he had lost control of the situation, and he couldn't handle it. He thought if he could get enough people to pressure me, I would cave. He thought I would doubt myself, that I would question my decision, that I would second-guess whether I was being too harsh. But I didn't. I replied to the last message with a simple, "I appreciate your concern, but Jason and I are over. Please don't message me about this again." One by one, the messages stopped. I started hearing less and less about him until a few of those same friends blocked Jason because, apparently, he had been pestering them non-stop to talk some sense into me. Update 3. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more ridiculous, Jason found a way to outdo himself. I had already blocked his number after our last conversation, but he must have realized it because the next thing I knew, I got a notification from Venmo. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, but when I opened the app, I saw the request sitting there, bold as day, $1,200 for rent and utilities for the time you stayed at my place. I stared at it for a full minute, my brain refusing to process the sheer audacity. Jason had actually sent me an invoice. He had genuinely convinced himself that after everything, after he had begged me to move in, after he had assured me over and over again that I wouldn't have to pay rent, after he had been the one to change his mind and call me a leech, I somehow owed him money for the months I had lived there. It was so outrageous, so absurd, that I actually burst out laughing. This was a new level of delusion, even for him. I knew he had a fragile ego, that he hated losing control, but this was desperation in its purest form. He had to be grasping at whatever he could to regain some sense of power, to convince himself that he wasn't the one who had been left behind, that I had taken something from him. He wanted to reframe the situation so he wasn't the guy who pushed his girlfriend away over rent. No, in his version of reality, he was the generous boyfriend who had supported a freeloading girlfriend, and now he was just asking for what was fair. It was pathetic. I responded with exactly what the situation deserved, "You're joking, right?" But he wasn't. He doubled down almost immediately, launching into a self-righteous rant about how I had lived in his apartment rent-free, how I had taken advantage of his kindness, how it was only fair that I contribute to the costs now that I was gone. He tried to dress it up in logical terms, but the cracks in his reasoning were painfully obvious. He was bitter. He was humiliated. And most of all, he was desperate to make me feel like I had done something wrong. I shut that down fast. I told him he was out of his mind if he thought I was going to pay him a single cent for a situation he had created. He had invited me into that apartment. He had assured me, insisted, that I wouldn't have to pay rent while I was in school. He had chosen to stay in that overpriced condo instead of moving somewhere more affordable, and now that his ego had taken a hit, he was trying to retroactively charge me for it. It was laughable. That's when he really lost it. He called me ungrateful. He said I had used him. He told me I was proving all of his friends right, that I was exactly the kind of person they had warned him about. He made it sound like I had been running some kind of long con, like I had plotted all along to move into his apartment, enjoy a few months of free rent, and then leave him high and dry. It was infuriating, but at the same time, it was sad. He had backed himself into such a corner that the only way he could justify what had happened was by painting himself as the victim. His final message was the best part. You'll never find another guy like me. That, at least, was true. I would never find another guy like him, and thank God for that. The last thing I needed was to go through this nightmare all over again. I blocked him right then and there, Reddit style, without another word. I didn't need to argue with him, I didn't need to explain myself, and I definitely didn't need to sit through another pathetic attempt to make me feel guilty for choosing myself for once. And just like that, he was out of my life. As for me, I moved into my new apartment, settled in with my roommates, and finally felt like I had control over my life again. No more walking on eggshells, no more waiting for the next passive-aggressive comment about money, no more feeling like I had to prove my worth to someone who let his friends' opinions dictate how he saw me. I surrounded myself with people who actually respected me, who understood what it was like to be working towards something, who didn't measure a person's value in dollar signs. I wasn't living in a luxury condo anymore, but I had something far better, peace. And there was no price tag on that.